Well, the tape's run out again, so I'll have to try and continue from where I left off. I was telling you that on our supposed half day off, we had to do a lot of scrubbing and cleaning before we could leave, so that more often than not, we were lucky if we could get away for a half day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But then, now to give you some idea of the responsibility of boys, young boys in those days, or young people generally, girls as well for that matter, but to give you some idea, I'll just tell you what I had to do when I started work. Now, we used to deliver meat in those days. There was very little, there wasn't a deal sold in the shop, only at weekends. And so what my job was, working for my Uncle Jim, I'd get there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the first thing we had to do, me and an older young fella who was actually my uncle. He was also my uncle, but he was only about 19 years of age. He was actually my mother's youngest brother. But the two of us used to get there at 8 o'clock, and he had the key to the shop because it was a lock-up shop. And we had to take the windows down from the shop, because in those days butchers' shops had to be kept cool to keep the meat fresh. So the windows were in frames that you could lift out and take into the shop, and so that the front of the shop was open. I mean, if you'd wanted to put your hand as you passed on a piece of meat, you could have done. But that was our first job. Then I had a notebook, and I'd got to the town, Prescott, where my uncle's shop was. For my purpose, at any rate, it was divided into 3 parts. And I had to start out with this notebook, and I would start out at the west end of the town. I had to walk, mind you. Even my Uncle Jim only supplied one bike, and this uncle of mine had that. I had to walk wherever I went. And I had to go around the west end of the town, and to all my uncle's customers, I would go and call at the different houses, and they would tell me what meat they wanted for that day. Now, it would perhaps take me, anything from half hour to 3/4 of an hour to do that. And then when I got back, I'd have to walk all the way back to the shop, and I would leave that notebook behind, and I would pick up a fresh notebook and start another, the south end and the east end of the town. And I would have to go in and out of all the streets where my uncle had customers, and do the same again, booking orders. And then I would take that book back to the shop, and I'd leave that back. And then I would pick up the 3rd book, and I would do the north end of the town and all the rest. And I would have to do the same thing over again, go round, and people would order half a pound of steak, 2 chops, a pound of chops, half a pound of sausage or stew beef, whatever it was they wanted, I booked down in the book. And when I'd got all 3 in, by the time I'd got all the 3 books in, my uncle would have cut all these orders ready, and they would be on pieces of white paper, like greaseproof paper like you get today, each one with the name on the corner. And I would have to carry all these in a basket and deliver them. And that went on until all the customers had given their orders and they'd all been delivered. And you can bet by the time I'd finished, it was about 12 o'clock, ready for, near dinner time. So it meant I was on the go all the morning, either booking orders or delivering them. So that people in those days, even ordinary working class people, the working mother, of course, who had a lot of work to do in the house that they don't have to do today, but she didn't need to go out shopping. She could have all her shopping delivered, which was a good thing too. But I would be doing that up to dinner time. Well, then I would have an hour for my dinner, and after dinner we would have to start scrubbing out again. My uncle, he was scrupulously clean. Of course, with it all being wood, everywhere was wood. The front of the shop where they laid the meat out was all in white wood, and the shelves all round were in white wood, and all the meat was hung up on rails, steel rails all round, the big pieces of meat. And of course and the baskets that we used to carry the meat round in, and there was also a pony and trap that one of the men who worked for my uncle used to deliver to customers who lived quite a distance away. And he had a great big white box that he used to put all his orders in. But all these things, of course, got blood-stained with the blood from the meat. And we had to scrub all these and get every stain out. My uncle was very stern, very severe, very strict, and our word, and you had to do as you were told in those days, I can tell you, because he was on to me for something once, and I answered him back, and he gave me a slap across the ear. So that's the sort of thing you got in those days. But that was then we would go on like that and cleaning, and then there were all sorts of the scales were all brass with brass weights. They had to all be polished with metal polish. Everything had to be spotlessly clean, and I can tell you it used to take us most of the afternoon doing that. Then there were sausages to be made, and I can tell you, give you some idea of the responsibility of a young lad in those days. I used to my uncle taught me first, my uncle and my aunt, they taught me how to do the job, but I had to make 200 pounds worth of sausages. Luckily, this was only in the 8 winter months, because there was no pigs. They never sold any pork in the summer because it wouldn't keep. So pork was only on sale in the 8 winter months that had an R in them, like January, February, March, December, November, so on. But they were the months when they could sell pork. In the 4 summer months, April, May, June and July, there was no pork at all sold. But anyway, in the months that they did sell pork, and we used to make pork sausages, I had this job of making the pork sausages. And there was a big machine in the back, and it had to be turned by hand, and there was 4 blades. There was a big bowl that held about 20 pounds worth of meat, and it rotated as you turned the handle, and at the same time there was 4 knives that used to turn in the opposite vertically, that used to cut the meat into little bits as you turned the handle. Well, my uncle used to bring in these about 20 pounds in weight of pieces of meat and pork, and I used to put them in this bowl, and then I'd got to turn the handle until they were all chopped fine. And while I was doing that, I'd probably been soaking some loaves in water because of so much bread went in. And then I'd got to weigh the salt and weigh the pepper that went in, and it had to be a certain weight so that they didn't get them either too salty or too peppery. And there was sage. I'd got to rub sage. That we used to have bunches of sage hung on the ceiling, and I used to have to get a bunch of sage and rub it through my hands until it was fine. And then, of course, it was all mixed up with this meat, and then the bread was mixed up with it as well. And then it had got to go through the machine that put it in the skins, and that was another job that you had to learn, tying them in threes without bursting them. Another thing we used to make was brawn, and my Aunt Phoebe used to see to that. There was a boiler in one corner of the back of the shop, and all the meat and pork or whatever was going in the brawn used to be boiled in this. But then I had to chop it up after it was boiled and put it into basins to set. So I learned quite a few things, you know, and I learned how to cut meat up. It's surprising, as I say, what boys of our age had to do in those days. That they wouldn't think of giving them to jobs like that today at such a young age. But anyway, although I learned quite a lot, and it was nice being outside, on the other hand, I didn't like being tied so many hours. And some of my pals, I was keen on football and all that sort of thing, and some of my pals were all enjoying themselves at night while I was still working, and at weekends, of course, working Saturday, I couldn't go and watch any football matches or even join in games myself. So I really wanted to get out of it. So as soon as I was 14, I did do just that. One of my customers, a Mrs. Honor, her husband was the superintendent in a factory nearby, and it was in the electrical department of this particular factory. And opposite to my uncle's butcher's shop was a grocer's shop, and I'd got friendly with a young boy who was the errand boy there. His name was Joe Pye, and anyway, he was about 6 months older than me, or somewhere near that, and he left when he was 14. He was like me, he'd been there from 13 to 14, and when he was 14, he'd left and he'd got a job at the BI, as it was called, this factory. British Insulated Cables really was the name, but used to, for short, they always referred to it as the BI. And I saw him once or twice after he'd got this job, and I asked him about it. I asked him where he was working and all about it. So he told me what shop he was in, and that this Mr. Honor was the superintendent of the electrical department. and he was in the electrical department. Well, so when I was about a week off 14, and at the weekend, I took Mrs. Honor a weekend roast, and when I said, do you think Mr. Honor could find me a job? So she said, well, I don't know, but I'll ask him if you like. She said, where would you like to go? Well, so I said, oh, I'd like to go in the meter department, because this was where this Joe Pye was working. So she said, all right, I'll ask him. Well, the following Saturday morning, I took of course I'd been taking her order all week as well, but on the Saturday morning I took her a roast as usual, and she said, Mr. Honor said on Monday morning, go to the BI and ask for Mr. Powell, the foreman, and tell him that Mr. Honor sent you. So I went straight back to my uncle's shop and told him I was finishing that night. And as I was 14 then, of course, I was free to leave. And that was the last of my butchering days. Well, I duly took up my new job with the electricity company. The department that I was sent to was called the meter shop. They made the electricity meters the same that you have in your house for measuring your electricity consumption. But just at this time, the electricity firm was a bit pushed for space, and they were having a new department built so that the making of meters could be carried on in this department. Well, meanwhile, the work was going on in an old Baptist chapel in Kemble Street, and it was rather amusing in some respects, because the men all sat round at the benches or the machines in this chapel, and the foreman sat in the pulpit, and he could see all round and see that the men kept at the work. And the vestry was used as a stores for component parts for the meters. Now, my job when I got there was, first of all, I was the errand boy. If the men in the shop wanted anything bringing from the main factory, I had to go for it. But my other job was that I was the storekeeper, and when the men who actually assembled the meters wanted a set of parts, they came to me in the stores, and I issued them out with the separate parts for the meter, and screws and nuts and all the different things that went into a meter. And it was quite interesting work, really. I can always remember one funny part, though, was that I had a ladder to climb up to the highest shelves where some of the parts were. And at the time, I was wearing clogs. And when I put the front part of my feet on the ladder to go up, it left a gap at the back of my clogs. Well, one day I was up the ladder, a couple of young fellas, they were about 18, they evidently came in with the idea of a joke, and they came and asked me for certain parts which were up on the top shelf. I went up the ladder, and without me knowing, they'd concealed a bottle of water behind them. And when I got up to the top of the ladder and the back of my clogs was sticking out, they poured water down and filled my clogs with water. Of course, it was a huge joke for them, but not funny for me. But of course, it was all in a day's work. Now, I had to brush the floor too once a week, and I had all kinds of different jobs like that. But after I'd been on this job for about 3 months, they took on another apprentice, and he was a boy named Joe Hatton, and he lived right opposite. His mother was a widow, and she used to make sausages and meat pies. In fact, when I was the butcher's boy, my uncle used to supply her with a lot of the stuff for making the sausages and brawn and all those sort of things, and I used to deliver it to her. But anyway, to get back, on a Friday afternoon, this Joe Hatton's mother used to make meat pies, and they were very nice ones too, I can tell you. She only charged a penny for them. And also on a Saturday afternoon, our foreman, Mr. Powell, he had to go across to the main factory to get all the wages for the men in our department so that he could pay us out on Friday night. Well, when Joe Hatton came and he told us about his mother making these nice meat pies, of course, some of the men wanted to buy one of these meat pies. So while the boss was away, myself and Joe Hatton used to go across to his mother's, and we used to come back with about a dozen of these meat pies and sell them to the men. Of course, they were all eaten before the foreman got back, and I can always remember that part. Now, after about 3 more months, the new department, the new building that they'd been building all through the summer, was completed. So we moved away from this chapel, and we went into this new building. Quite a nice building it was, by the way. And this was the first time that we had women working alongside us, because they brought in half a dozen women. And, well, I say half a dozen women, most of them were really girls, anything from about 15 years of age upwards. But the oldest of them was actually 22. Her name was May Prescott. And by a strange coincidence, this May Prescott was the soprano who'd been in the concert party that I used to sing with. So I actually knew her. And she was actually courting one of the tenors in the concert party. And she used to tell me all about it. It was quite laughable, really. But anyway, as I say, there was these 6 girls and women, and there was one thing about it: they were all nice, decent girls. You know, there was nothing common about them, well brought up. You never heard bad language or anything like that from them, and they were very well behaved. Of course, when we moved into this new place, this May Prescott, the stores was a much bigger place now, and May Prescott was put in charge of the stores, and I was put in as her assistant. In fact, I had to practically teach her the job because I'd been doing it before. But I was back again to her assistant and general errand boy. Now, by the time I reached the age of 15, the foreman had suddenly decided he wanted a clerk, and he took me to be his clerk, and from the age of 15 to 16, in fact, it was a bit more than 16, I was his clerk all the time. It was my job to go round and do take the men's time. I was kind of what you could call a timekeeper. I had to go round and write down what they've been doing all day and make slips out for each man, so many hours on this job and so many hours on the other. And I had to see to the piecework cards. Some of them were on piecework, and all kinds of little jobs to do. And I used to have to make the time slips out. It was each man, you had to send a time slip in at the end of the day, and you had to put that his time. He started work at such a time in the morning and finished at night. And there was all kinds of little jobs like that fell within my domain. But there was another job, and actually I can feel quite proud of doing this kind of a job, because it required quite a bit of, well, you know, you've got to know what you were doing. And this job, as I'm telling you about, in the meter, you know yourself, when you look at it, you see a kind of an arrangement behind a window where there's a lot of little pointers, and they tell them, they move along as you're using your electricity, and they actually keep account of how much they register the amount of current that you're using. Now, of course, one part of what they call this the counter, and one part of the counter was fairly simple, you know, I mean, to anybody in the engineering industry. But at that time, all the electricity companies were private. Instead of being nationalised like they are today, they were private, and there were different voltages, different price per unit. And so all these things had to be taken into account when the meters were made, because the counter had to be altered according to the price per unit. And to do that, there was what they call, there was a system of wheels and pinions at the back of the counter, and they had to have the right number of teeth in the wheels and the right number of teeth in the counter, so that it didn't matter what price per unit it was, it would register equally well. And it was quite a job working out the different wheels and pinions that had to be used on this job. And the foreman taught me how to work it out, because when we took the piecework card and the job to the man who was going to do that particular set of counters, I'd got to put down the wheels that he'd got to use in what they call the back gear. So, and as I was pretty good at figures and all that, I was able to do it, and I never made any mistakes. Well, because I did my job so well, the boss wanted to keep me as his clerk, but that wasn't my idea. I'd gone as an apprentice, an apprentice electrical instrument maker, and I wanted to learn that job. I didn't want to be a clerk. So we got to that stage where I was turned 16 and I was still doing this clerk's job, so I had to go get talk to the foreman and tell him I wasn't satisfied, that I wanted to learn the trade. So he moved me onto the bench from there, and by the time he did that, it was about, it'd be 1916 probably. Well, in 1916, as you know, the war started. But of course, it wasn't till August that it started. But in the meantime, I'd been working on the bench and doing a bit of jobs on different machines and getting to know a bit. Well, I carried on doing jobs like that until the war started. I've got to go back a little bit because it's quite easy, you know, as you're thinking about what happened in the past, to miss certain parts, and then they suddenly come to mind, and then, of course, you've got to fill it in. And this was when I was still at school, at the age of 12, and if you remember, I was taking papers out, and I'd been doing that since I was 8 years old. And to tell the truth, I was getting a little bit tired because I was tied so much with that job, very little freedom. So I was talking to one of my old school pals one day, and he told me that he was earning a shilling every Saturday by going and acting as assistant to, or helper, call it what you like, to one of the men who delivered mineral waters for the local firm of Hayes and Conning. And I mean, to get a shilling for a day's work like that was quite good. Well, here was I, putting in all these hours and being tired all through the week, taking papers, and I only got 1 6 for it. And so 1 shilling and 6 pence. So I thought, I've had enough of taking papers out, and I'll see, providing I can get a similar job on a Saturday, I'm going to give up the paper job. So I made up, first of all I had a talk to this boy and he told me how to go about asking Mr. Hayes. So I went to see Mr. Hayes and I asked him if he wanted a lad to help in the mineral water delivery round. And luckily, just at that time, he did want one. So I started on that. And I used to like it because we used to start... Well, it was interesting because on a Friday night, we used to go to the little factory where they made the mineral waters, and we used to meet the man who we were going to act as assistant to the following day, Saturday. Now, the man I was going out with was a man named Joe Roscoe. So I used to wait till this Joe Roscoe came back from his delivery round on the Friday, and he would tell me what he wanted putting on the cart, or the lorry, whichever you like to call it, but we used to call them carts. It was a kind of a lorry. He would tell me all the different kinds of mineral waters he wanted putting on, and how many of each kind, and how many crates of pickles and things like that. And the next morning I would go to the factory about, let's say about 7:30, and I would get these boxes, and I can tell you they're quite heavy because I wasn't a very big boy, but and each box contained 24 bottles of mineral waters, so it was quite a job lifting them onto the lorry and putting them in a convenient position. Used to have to put so many, about 3 tiers down each side, and then I used to have the space in between, and then when the delivery man used to go into the shop, and he would ask the shopkeeper what they wanted that particular day, then he would come out and he would perhaps say to me, I wanted a dozen lemon squash, 6 lemonades, 6 cherry cider, 6 cream soda, and so on. And I had to put them in boxes and then hand them over to him to take to the shop. But there was always a nice ride in between. And another thing about it is you got a free bottle of mineral waters while you were on the job. But I quite enjoyed that, and I kept on that job until I started work at my uncle's at the age of 13. Well, the reason I told you that part of my history was because while I was on this job at the BI, as we called it, the electricity firm, in the first 2 years I was there, that was when I was 14 and 15, the Boys Brigade, of which I was still a member, had started to have a camp at the Isle of Man. We went along with the Liverpool battalion, and I thought I'd like to go on this camping because we had a whole week at the Isle of Man, and it was quite a good outing. But anyway, what I wanted to tell you was this, that I only got 3p a week pocket money, and I couldn't save enough money because we had to pay so much to go. I think it was about, I forget if it was 10 shillings or £1. It wasn't a great deal, but anyway, it was more than I could afford. So I started taking papers out again on Sunday morning. And with the money that I got on Sunday morning, you used to get better paid because they'd found out in the last year or two that it had been very difficult to get boys to deliver on a Sunday morning, so they had to pay a bit more. And so, as I say, I took this job on of delivering papers on Sunday morning again in order to have the money to be able to go to the Isle of Man. And I did. I had 2 nice holidays at the Isle of Man with the Boys Brigade. We went to Peel, which is on the west side of the Isle of Man. You know, you went across from Liverpool to I forget the name now of the place where we landed on the east coast of the Isle of Man. But I know we had to get onto a little train, and it took us across the island to Peel, and that's where we had our camp. And I thoroughly enjoyed going there, I can assure you. There's one thing I ought to have mentioned with regard to during my school life, and that was with regard to the Sunday school at the Holt. Now, we used to have a Sunday school outing once a year, and because it was about the only outing that children round our way ever got, we looked forward to this. And I can remember the first outings, was to a place called Peck's Hill, and it was only a few miles away really, but they used to take us in wagonettes. Those were a kind of a coach, open on top, and they were drawn by about 3 or 4 horses. And I mean, there was no buses or anything of that kind in those days, and where we went to, there was no trams went, and certainly no people didn't have cars to go to them. So this was one way that they used to travel in these wagonettes, as they called them. They were really like something like a bus in a sense. There was the downstairs was like the inside of a bus, and you went up the stairs onto the top deck, but of course that was open, it wasn't covered in, and all the children used to go on top because they could see more, and the parents used to go and sit inside. But it was a lovely drive. You couldn't get direct, you had to go kind of round different roads and lanes in order to get to it, so that although it was only about 3 or 4 miles away as the crow flies, it was about 10 miles or the old journey up by wagonette. But I mean, when we got there was a big pavilion at the top of this hill. It wasn't a very high hill. It was grown over with gorse and 1 or 2 vacant patches where you could play games while you were there. But there's this big pavilion where we had our tea. Now, after going there for a few years, the Sunday school authorities decided to take us to New Brighton instead. Now, although Liverpool is only about 10 miles from the Holt, and New Brighton is only 3 miles up the river from Liverpool, none of us had ever been to New Brighton, and in fact we never would have gone had they not taken us. So of course this was something really grand, to go to New Brighton, to the seaside, because we went to Liverpool on trams. They had special trams came from St Helens, and they used to take us right to the pier right to the pier head in Liverpool. And we children, the trams in those days were open tops too. And we children who used to sit on top, we used to just enjoy going along and being able to see all the fields and the woods as we went through, because at that time it was mostly fields from Prescott to Knotty Ash, where Ken Dodd comes from. Knotty Ash, by the way, is just on the outside of Liverpool. And once you got past Knotty Ash, you were really going into Liverpool, and then that was something marvellous to us children, seeing all the shops and the towns. There was one thing that we saw a lot of Chinese laundries as we passed along, because most of the laundries were just small affairs run by Chinese in Liverpool. Anyway, we had this lovely ride right through Liverpool, right to the pier head. And when we got to the pier head, we got off the trams and we got on the ferry boats, which took us across to New Brighton. And then when we got to New Brighton, we could go and play on the sands until it was time for tea. And it had been arranged that we go to some church hall for a tea, So at about 4 o'clock we would leave the sands and go and have a tea. And then after we'd had a tea, we would perhaps have a walk around New Brighton, look in the shops, and then back to the sands till it was ready to go back about 6:30. And then we'd have the nice journey back to Liverpool by boat and then back again on the tram. And it was really a lovely time. So I thought I ought to tell you about those sort of things, because children today, they're so used to being run here and there by car and going to different places. I don't think they could appreciate just what it meant to us to go to the seaside just for that one outing. I ought to tell you that that girl named Edie Lyon, who later became your mother, used to be on these outings as well, because of course she went to the same Sunday school that I did. One thing that I did at weekends, now that I had nights and weekends free, was that I built up a football team. And we called ourselves the Old Juniors. And I acted as secretary. In fact, I used to pick I was secretary, manager and the whole lot, because I used to write away to arrange matches, and then when we'd arranged a match, I used to pick the team myself, and I used to write the team on a sheet of paper and get the shop, Mrs. Townsend in the newsagent shop, to put it in her window. Quite amusing, really, when you look back on it. But of course we didn't play every weekend. It was only now and again, because we weren't in any league. It was just pastime, for give us a chance to get a game of football ourselves. Because actually, most of the time, the firm that I worked for, the BI, they had their own football team, and they were quite a good team. They played in what was called the West Cheshire League at the time, and they were always very near to the top of the league, and I used to watch those quite a bit. And then later on, my elder brother, Alfred, he was like me. He built up a team, and they entered a league that was based on St Helens, and they were called the Holt. And he used to more or less run the team like I did. He did all the secretarial work, but of course, and he got most of the players together, so it was more or less his team. But I remember that when he got this team going, I used to go and watch them, because being in the St Helens League, most of the